But I am here to talk about leadership and the notion that everyone can lead. Everyone can lead. That leadership is not for a chosen few, a select few, but everyone has the ability and the potential to lead. And I want to talk to you about how I came to that notion. I got my start after undergrad working at a juvenile jail in Buffalo. And so you took me back a little bit because I actually worked the wing that had the kids who were lifers. And after that, when I came down to New York City, I worked for a foster care agency, Lutheran Community Services, where I was assistant director, and I had 8 group homes between the Bronx and Brooklyn, and about 110 kids I was responsible for 24 hours a day. But I wanted to move on and do a different kind of work. I felt that we weren't getting to the answer. I felt that the answers and solutions were in the community somehow, and I wanted to get to the community. So the way that, I hope I got this thing right. The way that happened for me is when my friend and I, my roommate then at the time, founded an organization, this is 1993, called Fresh Youth Initiatives, FYI for short, in the Washington Heights community of Manhattan. FY is just celebrated its 21st anniversary. FY was built like any other after-school program. Your Boys and Girls Club, your Y, except that we wanted to sort of change the paradigm a little bit. That instead of kids coming to this organization and being what we felt were consumers, playing basketball, learning karate, getting tutoring, learning to swim, those kind of things, we want them to come to this organization and be producers, to do something for other people or for the community. This is where I pause. I want you to reflect for a moment on the first time you stood up for something else. Go back as far as you can. The first time you took interest in a cause that was bigger than you, on behalf of someone else, a community, an issue. FY was built around, I mentioned theory, right? An ecological model. A person's relationship to their environment. That the young person, when they get engaged in helping others or helping their community, that good things happen. You know, the healing power of doing good is what we called it. My dissertation is based on. That when young people start caring about things outside of themselves, that their relationship to their peer group changes. Their relationship to institutions change. Their relationship to their families change. Their relationship to the outside world changes. Their community changes. And that funny things happen, like their sense of future and their future orientation. That thing that happens when you work with young kids who are in trouble, when they say, I don't think I could live past age whatever. I don't see that future. Well, this is a way to change that. They start having hope about what their future might be. Especially when they start looking and having experiences outside their community. When you take kids outside their community, they travel. And we would take kids every year on somewhere called Trip USA. We'd fly to California or Florida or Kentucky. And we'd do volunteer work there, and they leave their community for the very first time, and they help other people who are different than them who need help. And they start thinking, you know what? I just left Washington Heights in New York City, where I'd never left before. I got in a train or a plane and flew all the way to California. I did volunteer work over there, and the people over there accepted me, and they looked nothing like me. My relationship to the world begins to change when we do that, when you're a young person. And so we felt that through this kind of action, that leadership could be developed. And that leadership is a muscle. Like any other muscle. And the more you work that muscle, the stronger it gets. So we kept creating opportunities for kids from that community to be leaders. And what came out of it was stuff like New York City's only youth-run food pantry. New York City's only youth-run soup kitchen. A project, much like the quilt project outside, where kids make sleeping bags from scratch for the homeless and distribute them around. It's the street homeless. So I want to talk about this organization, another one as well. By the way, this is FY, some kids walking into the building. This is me building, we renovated this entire house in Staten Island in one day. Painted the entire house for a family that was displaced by Hurricane Sandy. That was 9/11. I think it's the date on it. No, that was 9/11 last year. But I want to start by telling the story of this young lady here, Mona Lisa Ferdinand. I met her when she was 13 years old. Every bit a New York City girl, right? Big bamboo earrings, Yankee hat, hoodie, leather jacket. It's official, right? She was a single mom in a tough situation. She was also the first young person to join our board of directors. And she was the young person, and by the way, FY's board charter, when my partner and I came together, and I'll talk about him a little bit later on, we wanted to create an organization that had the best practices of youth development. So in our charter, 1/3 of our board of directors had to be under the age of 21. So what that means is that there were 14-year-olds like her who voted on my salary, who accepted and amended our annual budget, who made governance and policy decisions on behalf of the organization. And one of those decisions that she made was that hunger was serious in her community. And she urged us and implored us and said that we need to respond to that. And she was the brainchild behind the Helping Hands Food Pantry, New York City's only youth-run food pantry, that's been in operation for 15 years and serves 10,000 needy families every year, and it's run by kids who are as young as age 8 and 9. It's a little bit of an old photo because today, she's a lawyer with a degree from the University of Maryland working in the Pentagon. So everyone leads. I might be getting ahead of myself. Everyone leads. And I want to pull an example from US history. We learned this during the civil rights movement. You know, Martin Luther King, we all heard about them. I remember learning about him, this great man who gave great speeches. But his work was not the work of one man. It was the work of many people. There were countless other leaders and countless other people, especially young people, those who know the history, know that what? If not for young people, the movement would have died. Because when you have a big, fat guy like me walking the street getting bit by dogs, hosed down, and beaten, as we've seen in the last few weeks, no one cares. But when you have kids as young as my son, and the other kids who are doing poetry walking in the streets, and getting bitten by dogs, and hit, and hosed, the world asks, what could he have possibly done to deserve that kind of treatment? It was that response and that engagement of young people that actually saved the movement. It's the work of the many. So for us, leadership development starts with the sense of the be and how to be a leader. And the framework I like to use for this is the U.S. Army's leadership manual, which is called Be, Know, Do. Be, Know, Do. The U.S. Army focuses a lot on the be. Now, a lot we know about leadership development in this country is about the know and the do. The skill development of being a leader. Know your job, do your job. There's a lot of cynical sort of thought around leadership nowadays. But it's not really about whether you know your job or do your job. It's whether you are a jerk. What kind of leader are you being? Do we believe you? Do you practice what you preach? Do you have ethics? Do you have values? The Army focuses a lot on the be. And the be is know yourself first. What kind of leader am I? What's my mission? What do I stand for? Do I walk my talk? Do I know it well? Do I relate to people with an authentic way? And we do the same thing when we train the staff at my organizations and the young people who I work with. How do you be a leader? How can you be more of a leader? And you can spend the rest of your life picking up the know and the do, more skills. There's always going to be some certificate program or some training program or some advanced degree you can get to get more skills. But how do you live in the role of leadership? We're talking about assets and values. And there are some values I want to talk about. One of them is assets. Another is diversity and inclusion, collaboration, and continuous learning. To discuss assets, I want to borrow from the framework of the glass being half full or half empty? Those who know asset-based work are probably familiar with this example. Is the glass half full or is the glass half empty? Well, I've done the research for 20 years, empirically speaking, and I can tell you that the answer to that question is yes. 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 The glass is both half full and half empty. And like all of us, as individuals, or the communities we work in, or the people we work with, it's half full and half empty. See, a lot of what we know to be community-based work, a lot of what we know about asset-based work has been people who are half full going to serve people who are what? Half empty. When true leadership is the fact that you recognize that we are all half full and half empty. And when you can stand in front of someone in your emptiness, in your fullness, and recognize their emptiness and their fullness, and meet somewhere in the middle and do work, that's how you build community. That's how you do build leadership. When they can see you in your emptiness, and by the way, I can be empty, as every leader can. We just went to the survey of what we're good at the organization, and I wrote down my list of things I suck at, right? And then I went and read to my staff. You know what happened? They agreed. It's no secret. The things we're not good at is no secret. Everyone around us knows it. Heidi Lopez, I met her when she was 10 years old. A gifted student attending a school mod hall for gifted students in New York City. But she had a challenging family background. She was abused at home. And she dropped out of school by the time she was in 7th grade and developed a drinking problem. Heidi was also on our board of directors. It's one of the ways that, because she was such a tremendous leader. And one day one of our funders came in and said to her, asked her, what can people from my generation learn from people from your generation about diversity and inclusion? We were having this whole conversation. He says, well, for your generation, diversity is an ideal. For my generation, diversity is something that you do. She was saying that people sometimes talk about how things should be different, but they don't act on it. What she was talking about was you don't have to have a conversation about diversity when you're actually in a room that's diverse. Like today, right? We don't have to have a conversation about who should be in the room because many did a really good job of what? Getting them in the room. Do we have to talk about young people? They were here. Do we have to talk about men of color, women of color, race issues? They were here. And if you keep going down the line, the people who need to be in the room. So it's about action. And I know a little bit about diversity. I'm a man of color who, despite how I talk and how I look and dress, grew up on a farm in South Carolina. My job in the morning was going to the hen house. My job in the afternoon was taking care of the dogs in our kennel. We had the finest hunting dogs in the county, 100 beagles. And when we moved north, we moved to Westchester County, New York, in a town called White Plains. And they ain't call it white for nothing. And as you can tell, I started an organization in a primarily Latino section of New York City called Washington Heights. I went to an Ivy League school and got my master's in business, Columbia, and got my PhD from a Jewish university, Yeshiva. I think that, I'm fairly diverse. Did I cover it all? Did I cover it all? All right. Collaboration. This work happens with collaboration. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention my friend. 2 Ivy League guys, my friend from Stanford, me from Columbia, who decided that we were going to start FY in the Washington Heights community in the extra bedroom of our 3-bedroom apartment. This is back in 1992 and 83. And the way we did it could have gotten us arrested because we went out to the community and went to parents and kids and, and fathers and said, do you mind sending your kids to our house after school? Something you could probably do 20 years ago you can't do today. Now I'll tell a story of Steve Ramos before I wrap up. I met Steve because of Public Allies. 14 years ago, Public Allies came to New York City. And I took on an ally an intern, essentially, in their very first class in New York City. His name was Steve Ramos. He's standing here next to the governor of New York State. Steve is a self-described former knucklehead. He had been in 3 high schools. He eventually dropped out of high school, got his GED, that he calls his good enough degree, before going to Public Allies. And when he came to me, and we worked together, he had such promise that after his apprenticeship year, I hired him on as a staff person. He quickly grew and rose in the organization, program director, assistant director, and then when I left, I recommended he become the executive director. He's been the executive director, he had been the executive director for the past 7 or 8 years. Yesterday, Monday, he just started his state-appointed job from the governor in New York State. All right. That's. And I want to end by by quoting my friend Michelle Obama. Michelle Obama, for those who don't know, was the founding executive director for Public Allies Chicago. And Michelle gave a speech a few years ago. She became First Lady that talked about her experience at Public Allies that I want to read from. This is Michelle. We all have skills and talents that make us good friends, family members, workers, and leaders. And we also have needs and shortcomings that come along with those strengths. We can't do well serving communities, as I learned with Public Allies, if we believe that we, the givers, are the only ones who are half full and the ones we are serving are half empty. That has been the theme of my work in my community my entire life. That there are assets and gifts out there in communities, and that our job as good servants, as good leaders, is not only just being humble, but having the ability to recognize those gifts in others and help them put those gifts into action. At Public Allies, we endeavor to do this by bringing young people together from diverse backgrounds. We worked with African Americans, Asian Americans, Latinos, Native Americans, white, gay, straight, you name it. College graduates, ex-felons. We brought them all together every week to work in a group, and truly that's where the magic happened. When you saw those kids from all those different backgrounds really tussling it out and trying to figure out their philosophies of the world in relation to their beliefs and stereotypes, the law school graduates realized they had a lot to figure out about how communities actually worked and how to engage people. There's nothing funnier than to watch a kid who believes they know it all actually come across some real tough problems that test every fiber of what they believe. And then you see that young person with a GED realize they could go to college because they are working with kids who are just as smart or not as smart as them, who are going. And they get a sense of the possibilities that they too have. They know that their ideas are just as good, sometimes even better. That's when those lights go off. That's what we think of when we think of being asset-based. That a kid from Harvard and a kid with a GED are both full of promise. At Public Allies, everyone learned to build authentic relationships with one another where they could recognize each other's strengths and provide honest feedback on their challenges. They gained a blend of confidence and humility that prepared them to be able to lead from the streets to the executive suites. You could take any one of them and you could plop them down in any community and they would know how to build relationships. That's our First Lady. So folks, that to me is a challenge of this work. Building communities, building collaboratives, working with integrity, building connections, and building leaders. And that's how we're going to lead. Thank you very much.